And now this a bit awkward moment of switching into English, because this session is gonna be in English in full. I'm very glad to be here and very well welcome to the session titled Sociology, Public, Caring or Detached Profession. And it's not merely a pure phrase, only formal phrase, but I'm really delighted to have the opportunity to introduce you our dear guests, friends, and colleague. We, on the right-hand side, my right-hand side, we have Professor Kaja Gadowska, Professor of Sociology at Jagiellonian University, Krakow, Poland, of course. She is visiting scholar at, among others, Tel Aviv, Heidelberg, St. Petersburg, Charles University in Prague, Tamkhan University in Taiwan, and University of Jordan, International University of Rabat, and Imam Khomeini University, International University in Iran. Quite interesting passport, if I may add. Moreover, she is currently the president of the European Sociological Association. In the previous term, she was the vice president of European Sociological Association and head of its policy committee. Moreover, she is the member of the Polish Sociological Association, Board of Directors, and PSA representative to the International Sociological Association. Her research interests focus on the public sphere and relation between politics, economics, and public administration in post-communist countries. Principal investigator for several grant projects, she has also co-authored or collected numerous publications. At this point, I will stop. I will not read a bibliography of our dear colleagues here. Kaja, very nice to have you here. So the same holds also for our dear Karin Dulan. She is research associate at the Center for Educational Research and Development, a unit of the Institute for Social Research in Zagreb, quite here in the neighborhood. She is a critical sociologist of education whose work has focused on how educational structures and processes amplify social injustice. In 2025, she was awarded a European Research Council Consolidator grant for her project RESADL, or RESADL, Reimagining Schools Through a Post-Disasters Lens. This 5-year project examines the various roles schools can play in response to natural hazards, including those that are embraced or resisted, while also envisioning the future of schools in the context of the climate crisis. She was a member of the presidency of the Croatian Sociological Association in the mandate from 2011 to 2023. So, great to have you here as well. And last but not least, of course, our dear colleague, Professor Siniša Zrinjšak. He is professor and head of the chair of sociology at the Faculty of Law. He was professor of European and Comparative Social Policy at the Department of Social Work, Faculty of Law, University of Zagreb until 2013. His main scientific interests include religious and social policy changes in post-communism, church-state relations, religion, and human rights, and European comparative social policy. He served as the vice president and president of the ISORECEA, International Study of Religion in Central and Eastern Europe Association, vice president of the International Sociological Association Research Committee for Sociology of Religion, president and vice president of the Croatian Sociological Association, general secretary of International Society for Sociology of Religion, vice coordinator of the European Sociological Association Research Network, and so forth. He is an associate editor in the European Journal of Social Work and member of editorial boards of several international scientific journals. He has been involved in several, mainly international scientific projects. Since 1998, he has been a part of the scientific team which performed 3 European values survey waves in Croatia, and so on, including over hundreds of publications in peer-reviewed journal on books. So it was the shortest version of CV possible, but let's go to discussion. The general idea and working plan is to have 3 introductory talks of our guests and participants, and afterwards we will open the floor for the joint discussion. As the general, we will start with Kaya, then with Karin, and afterwards conclude with Sinisha. Okay, Kaya, please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Krešimir, for this introductory words. Thank you, Valeria, and thanks to all of you for inviting me here. It's a real pleasure. And after Alexander's lecture, I hope that we will not bore you to death, because this lecture was so inspiring and thought-provoking. But when Krešimir invited me to this panel, I was thinking about a relevant topic that could show in practice all the dilemmas that we are facing as European Sociological Association and as sociologists ourselves. The topic of my presentation today will be... thank you.
Just to hear it better.
Okay, so the topic of my today's presentation will be the interrelation between democratic backsliding and academic freedom. What we see all over the world, not only in our region, like during the Law and Justice rule in Poland, or during Orban rule in Hungary, Erdogan in Turkey, etc., but also in, let's say, established democracies like United States. All over the world, practically, we observe democratic backsliding, and this is interconnected with threats to democracy. Just to show you some comparative data. Here, the upper part is a number of countries that are improving on the scale of, let's say, democracy and democratic system. And the red scale below is a scale of countries that are unfortunately declining. So you can easily see that at this very moment, 2 years ago, there were 60 countries that were backsliding and where democracy was threatened. When we think about our region, especially Central and Eastern Europe, the worst examples, of course, were Hungary, Poland under the rule of Law and Justice. Now we have civic platform, so let's say democratic party. Nonetheless, it turned out that recovering from all those damages, especially legal ones, it's not so easy. It takes time, and in some respects, we cannot do anything, especially when we think about judicial system, because the decisions has been made already, and if we question the makeup of juries, then it would be a total disaster. So we have to stick to what was decided, and recovering from those changes is quite challenging and time-consuming. Serbia is another example, and in recent years the situation was worsening. There were strikes, as we know, against the government, against corruption, and eventually European Sociological Association, not the international one, decided to issue a statement in defense of academic freedom, because our colleagues there were losing jobs, departments were being closed. The same situation we observe in Hungary as well, in particular in regard to gender studies, but not only, minority studies. The situation is even worse in Turkey. But let's see how it looks at the slightly bigger scale when we have quite a number of countries. Hungary, of course, the course of events was worsening. Now we can hope that it will improve slightly after the elections. What I wanted to show you here is what is especially striking is the population the population, the number of people who are living in countries where the condition of democracy is worsening, because the number of countries doesn't tell us that much. The number of people who are suffering because of in many cases, far-right political parties taking over governments and introducing reforms, this is even more depressing, I would say. So when we think about autocratizing countries, here in a different statistics, we have 45, but when we think about populations, it is here 38 of percent of people living in such conditions. Here you are with a perhaps more clear graphs, how it looks like, how it looked like 20 years ago and what we experience right now. So the number of population living in autocratizing countries is really, really growing. And let me skip this slide. There are several, of course, signs, democracy test, I would say, developed by Stephen Levitsky and Daniel Ziblatt in 2018. It was quite widely discussed book on that. So they concentrated on 4 factors: rejection of, or at least weakening commitment to democratic rules of the game, questioning election results, what we observed even in United States, supporting unconstitutional actions. So it was the stuffing of constitutional court by politically backed judges in Poland, which had a very acute results. Because after a while, there was a judgment of Constitutional Tribunal in respect to abortion. And abortion, and it was during COVID. So the severe conditions, and the Constitutional Tribunal issued a statement, a judgment that abortion is totally forbidden in Poland. There is only one condition, risk to life of woman who is pregnant. There were huge protests in Poland. When we think about scale, it was almost like in 80s with Solidarity movement. So everyone was on the streets, despite of COVID, despite of the situation. Nonetheless, this is a binding law. So here you have a very clear example what happens when we tolerate such actions, politicizing of judicial system, politicizing of local governments, etc., etc. It has very, very severe consequences for people. The other condition, the other factor is denial of legitimacy of political opponents. This also happens very often. Then toleration of or encouragement of violence. In Poland, the president of the city you visited was killed by a political opponent, by a person who just inhale all those narratives. So we had such examples. US, all of us remember quite well. Readiness to curtail civil liberties of opponents, including media. This is what is observed everywhere in the autocratizing regimes. Kim Lane Schepele, in her research, concentrated on autocrats themselves. So she argues that what is especially dangerous is strategic use of law by elected leaders to undermine democratic pluralism. This is what is happening, and those leaders are, I would say, learning and borrowing from each other. For instance, there are some scripts that were quite useful in several countries, so the leaders in another country introduce such changes in the countries they rule. Jarosław Kaczyński, for instance, in Poland, borrowed the whole idea of changing the makeup of constitutional tribunal and not only the whole judicial system in Poland from Orban. And it was also used by Erdogan quite, I would say, successfully. So this is what, how it works. They pass some practices to each other. And what I was saying at the very beginning of my talk was that academic freedom is very much linked to the conditions of democracy, and that with the decline of democracy, the importance of academic freedom is even greater. What we observe is a growing pressure on scientists, and especially on social scientists. Since we are here in post-communist countries, some of you, let's say the older generation, remember quite well how it worked. I visited last week Vilnius, and their sociology had a huge gap. They restarted in 90s from scratch. In Poland, the situation was different because after the war, we had sociology institutes, we had numerous widely recognized sociologists like Ossowski, for instance. But then, unfortunately, sociology was removed from universities. Sociology was forbidden. Because it is a critical science. So sociologists were presenting the real picture, how everything operates, right? And until the death of Stalin in 1956, until that time, sociology was unfortunately, as I said, forbidden. What we observe is kind of a backlash against sociology in particular, especially because of our public engagement in gender studies, in defending minorities, sexual minorities, cultural minorities, migrants, etc., etc. So sociology, because of that, very often falls prey to politicians of far right. And what is important here when we talk about academic freedom is the very definition of this notion. And it is not so simple. In the United States, it is very often conflated with the amendment, the first amendment to the Constitution, free speech. It's not the same. In our European tradition, academic freedom stems from the Humboldtian, I would say, vision of the university and the mission of university, which is truth-seeking. So this is a little different, but it has its own consequences. And European Commission already in 2022 acknowledged the importance of academic freedom for promoting active citizenship, tolerance, equality, diversity, openness, critical thinking, social cohesion, etc., etc. So what they underlined is that at universities, young generation learns how to talk with opponents, how not to insult people, listen to their arguments, etc., etc. And this also can be a tricky issue because sometimes we observe attacks from, I would say, both sides. On one hand, of course, universities are attacked by politicians. This is the main, I would say, road of attack. But on the other hand, sometimes we are also attacked by our colleagues who have different political stand, I would say. And this is the issue of self-censorship, that sometimes when we discover something that may be criticized among our, let's say, circles, right? Especially people who are at that stage of career that they are looking for, waiting for promotion. They think twice whether publish something or not. They think twice whether explore certain topic or better not, right? Because of how it may be received, not only by politicians, because such cases we observe, that a Minister of Science, for instance, ridicules a given topic. Very often gender, quite often Jewish studies, minority studies, etc., etc. But also colleagues from our own departments can criticize us heavily if we are not in line of what is accepted. So it is kind of a both-sided phenomena. We have also an issue of whether we should invite to the university, this is also an issue of academic freedom, people whose world views very, very much differ. Because on one hand, when we invite or give floor to a person who represents far right, we are kind of legitimizing those, well, positions, right? On the other hand, when we are not doing so, how young generation can learn how to encounter people with different views. That's one issue. The other is that those who are not invited radicalize because there is no platform for them. So it leads to polarization and social conflict. So this is really something that we should dedicate more attention to. We had several instances when students protested against some people due to alleged, let's say, political stand. And in my view, perhaps we should think twice. Of course, I am not in favor of inviting hate speech. I am not in favor of inviting people who claim that the earth is flat, etc., etc. Creation is what we observe in US, for instance. But on the other hand, we should provide some kind of a platform for discussion, for a dialogue. Otherwise, sociology can be targeted like in Florida. Conservative government assumed that sociology is only gender studies, minority studies, because we are vocal on those issues, right? Standing for minorities. And sociology was removed from universities, from colleges. So this is the side effect, and this is definitely something that we are not in favor of. So I am not, advocating compromising our values, but looking for some solutions and inviting for discussion, for dialogue, for critical evaluation, I would say. I started with. Yes, of course, because I will consume the whole time. Apologies for that. Academic freedom. There are several elements: freedom of teaching, freedom of research, freedom of learning, and also freedom to study. Freedom of dissemination, intramural and extramural, and this is very often attacked by let's say far-right governments, especially disseminating our outcomes outside of our departments. The right of self-governance, this is also very important, because a couple of years ago in Poland a law was introduced, not only in Poland, in Hungary as well, and other countries, that it is not the community who elects director of institute, dean and rector, it's the other way around. There is a special commission, and this commission elects rector, and then the power comes from up to down, and rector appoints dean, dean appoints directors of institutes, and it is not anymore a meritocratic decision. It's very often a political decision. And what is tricky here, that even if democratic parties take over, what they do at first, they are using those legal solutions that they were criticizing when they were opposition themselves. They are making use of that, and only after think about changing the legal framework. Academic freedom is defined in Article 13 of, not defined, addressed in Article 13 of the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights. But there is a very broad and very general definition. It only says that arts and scientific research shall be free of constraints and academic freedom shall be respected. But what is academic freedom? Different countries have different regulations. Sometimes academic freedom is addressed directly in constitutions, sometimes in legal acts of different level, I would say. Sometimes it is not addressed at all. What is important here, that there is a big difference between de jure and de facto protection of academic freedom. So in some Nordic countries there is no regulation on that. Nonetheless, politicians do not interfere with academia. In other countries there are, I would say, quite elaborated regulations, but no one respects them. So this is also something that needs more attention. When we talk about the state of academic freedom, in 2024, so 2 years ago, 34 countries have experienced significant decline in this respect. Here you see it was 2025, Hungary, and Poland, and also Romania, Slovakia, Bulgaria, Croatia, here at this very least, and at the bottom of this graph, Norway, Iceland, Finland, Nordic countries at the top. Some of those countries, as I said, have no regulation on academic freedom. Nonetheless, those values are respected there. And as you can see, changing of the government doesn't change overnight the score of a given country, because legal changes are introduced after a while. This is not a priority of governments. Here you have another graph with Hungary as the most horrifying example of academic freedom decline and threats to academic freedom. There are numerous repressions, social, legal, institutional mechanisms that can undermine academic freedom, legal reforms that I already mentioned, budget constraints, because especially in our region, universities are funded, many universities are funded by the state. We have special institutions who give grants, assign grants to researchers, and some topics during conservative rule are not getting any financing. There are some financial constraints on that, but also in countries where universities are private, the situation is equally dangerous, because then the sponsors decide what should be research, to what particular area the money should be directed. So both, I would say, types of universities, publicly funded and state funded and privately funded, can fall prey to different constraints to academic freedom. Public delegitimization of critical scholars with propaganda. This is something what we observe quite often. Politicians, ministers of science attacking a given person because of her or of his research, and commenting to press, to other media. We had such examples not only in Poland, in Hungary as well. So those mechanisms are numerous. I will not go into details with that. I can share my presentation. But what we should do to stop that? We were thinking about it with Jeffrey Players, the president of International Sociological Association. and very often we act together to amplify our voice. So it is not only a given country who protests. This is the whole community of European sociologists or international sociologists. This was a case of Belarus. A couple of years ago, ISA issued a statement on academic freedom in Belarus when militia entered universities. They took students and professors to jail, so we reacted. But in many cases, we didn't. In case of Hungarian, Central European University, I'm a graduate of this university, so this is something that I take really personal. There was no consent that we should react, because this is also, this is always an issue. If we react in a particular case, like in case of Serbia, then other countries have right to say, but in our case you were silent, expressionless, mute, right? So how do we pick those cases? In international associations, I think we should have special units who can dedicate more time and investigate a given situation. We cannot react to everything, but in case of academic freedom, I think that this is our priority. And when we act together, our voice, as I said, is more, it is stronger. I am not that naive to think that there will be a statement and the government in a given country will stop, their actions. But still, this is something that is very important for scholars living in a given regime. After issuing some statements, people were contacting us, thanking us for taking stand. So those who are attacked, those who are fired from universities, those who are not financed, etc., they really appreciate that. There are numerous, as I said, associations dealing with academic freedom. They are monitoring the situation in this respect. They are taking actions together. But as sociologists, I think that we have a special responsibility. This is our moral obligation to react. And let me stop here. Other issues we can address during our discussion, but as I said, speaking with a collective voice is something that may change dramatically situation of particular persons. The last thing is the 17th conference of the European Sociological Association. So I would like to invite you again to this conference. Of course, all the abstracts have been already accepted, and so this is the I would say final stage of drafting programs. But there will be a special session dedicated to academic freedom. There will also be quite a number of semi-plenaries dedicated to war. And our research networks, at the very moment we have 43 research networks, because historical sociology was recently accepted. So we will deal with numerous issues, including this one, and the whole conference is dedicated. The topic is strengthening democracy. So we don't want only to complain and say how bad it is, but we are calling for taking steps to improve the situation. Having said that, thank you, and apologies for taking that long. Pardon?
Five slides.
I will share.
Take a picture.
Those.
5 slides back to make.
Okay, we can definitely comment on that later on. Okay. Just a
mechanism of repression.
It's social media moment, of course. Okay. Okay, so I will use all my very scarce knowledge of Polish to say dziękuję Thank you for the great talk. Very inspiring, also concerning at some points, but we will definitely come back to these issues. We will continue with Karin, please.
Do you want to introduce me in Croatian as a gesture? Okay. Well, to begin with, thank you so much for inviting me to speak on the panel in such good company. And also, the title was an impetus for me to think through sociology as a public caring or detached profession. And of course, we know there are so many different positionalities within sociology, and I just wanted to put forward my own, which you kind of mentioned when you introduced me. So I'm speaking from a position of a critical, qualitatively oriented sociologist of education whose work intersects with sociology of disasters. So these are kind of my broad coordinates, so to speak. This is the literature that I'm immersed in, and so this is the position I'm going to contribute from today. And from this position, I'm concerned with what seems to me, and maybe I'm being a bit strict with this use of this term, what seems to me to be uncaring research in my subfield. And what I mean by uncaring research is research that treats participants primarily as sources of data rather than collaborators in knowledge production. Research which offers limited reciprocity and little commitment to support meaningful change, either during the research process itself or after. So we already have a sociology of care, where care itself is the object of research, and so much wonderful work has been done in this area and by some people who are also here today. But do we practice enough sociology as care, where care is a principle guiding how we engage in research relationships and what responsibilities we assume towards those people and communities we study? So we all have texts that have left a mark on us. One such text for me is a little booklet that was written by the Care Collective, and it's called The Care Manifest. And I was drawn to its very urgent tone, and there was a kind of an urgency when you were speaking as well today about the times that we live in. So I was drawn to its urgent tone and also its diagnosis of the contemporary world as increasingly uncaring. The authors point to tightening borders, misogyny and femicide, weakening public infrastructures of care, and a climate crisis that's hitting the most vulnerable on this planet. And since this work was published in 2020, I think the diagnosis has become only more difficult to ignore. We've witnessed wars in Ukraine and Palestine, escalating violence involving Iran and Lebanon, and then ongoing conflicts that we don't really get to read much about in countries like, for example, Sudan or Myanmar. And in addition, as I was preparing for today, I reread Michael Barraway's presidential address, and in it he mentions fascism as a haunting memory. And today it feels like a renewed political possibility. So against this backdrop, the Care Manifesto argues for a world organized around care. Its chapters expanding care beyond conventional associations with women's work, parenting and nursing, to include kind of different dimensions. So a chapter on caring economies, a chapter on caring communities, on caring politic states. And perhaps another chapter could be added, and that's a chapter on caring research. And I understand care as articulated in the Care Manifesto, our individual and common ability to provide the political, social, material, and emotional conditions that allow the vast majority of creatures on this planet to thrive, along with the planet itself. So I think a lot about what sociology would look like if advancing research was evaluated not only through theoretical innovation or methodological sophistication, but also on the basis of how research relationships themselves contributed, however modestly, and I want to sort of underscore the modest contribution maybe research can have in the way I'm going to talk about it, how it can contribute to collective capacities, resilience, and broader change. So in my field of post-disaster sociological research in education, or at least in the way in which it's reported in articles, reporting research, care is often framed through procedural compliance rather than social responsibility. So ethics review processes tend to focus on avoiding harm, securing informed consent, preserving anonymity, ensuring confidentiality. So in many of the articles that I've read, and you would be surprised at how I keep on making this little boom sound. So in many of the articles that I've read, and I'm kind of shocked by that, there is almost no mention of ethics. When ethics is mentioned, it's usually that the research has received approval from a specific committee, and then maybe they'll mention anonymity, they'll mention pseudonyms, but basically this is where it ends. Sometimes small benefits will be mentioned, like book tokens or certificates of participation. Now, Kathleen Tierney, who's the author of the book Disasters, A Sociological Approach, argues that alongside such familiar concerns, disaster researchers must also think very carefully about the risk of re-traumatization, emotional distress, and these, of course, and the previous ones that I've mentioned, they're essential foundations for how we do research. But they don't necessarily produce respectful, reciprocal, or accountable research relationships. I belong to a community, as we can frequently find communities of like-minded people. So to communities who are calling for care in research relationships to take center stage. For example, there's a collective called RADIX, Radical Interpretation of Disasters, which advocates for disaster research grounded in reciprocity, participation, and the prioritization of local ontologies and epistemologies. Similarly, there's one particular author whose work I really appreciate. She's a New Zealand-based researcher called Carol Much, and she's done research on the effects of earthquakes in Canterbury and Christchurch. And she, for example, is an author who actually, in her articles, dedicates quite a lot of space to a kind of what she considers to be an ethical approach, and writes about the importance of relationship building, emotional attentiveness, and a sensitively staged research process. So she puts these as central to the research process rather than a secondary consideration. And so I mentioned this book, The Disaster Manifesto. That's a kind of important text for me. Another important text for me is a book by Branley and Barnes, and the title of the book is Researching with Care, Applying Feminist Care Ethics to Research Practice. And this is a book which again argues for moving beyond the technicalities of methodology to the relationality of research itself. And what I find particularly compelling in the book is the idea that researchers should aspire not merely to avoid harm, but to leave things a bit better than before. And such an approach begins from a conviction that in an uncaring world, care should not remain external to sociological practice itself. So for these authors, researching with care has implications for how we design our research, how we collect our data, how we analyze our data, how we use it to make a difference. And I don't want to be sort of misread as someone who's calling just for a more empathetic researcher. But rather, I'm in this club that's advocating for co-created research, in which those whose worlds we study are included throughout the research process, so from planning to dissemination. And importantly, they acknowledge that participation isn't automatically empowering. It can be frustrating, it can be demanding, and caring in that process means being attentive to different capacities for participation. And what's particularly significant in their work is their insistence that research should contain an action component. So on the one hand, I've kind of entered a bit of a new field, and so I'm noticing in articles that are dealing with post-disaster contexts a real sort of lack of addressing ethical issues. But another thing I'm noticing is that at the end of an article, there are usually these kind of very dispassionate policy recommendations. And I don't want to say that these aren't important. It is important that research informs recommendations for improving disaster preparedness, response, and recovery. But from the perspective of a research grounded in care, they remain detached from the lives of participants. So if I kind of put this lens to my own work, and I really appreciated, the reflection earlier on one's own career, I could be quite disappointed with myself and quite frustrated with how I've done research previously, because I did not practice some of the things that I'm mentioning here as something that is what I aspire to for the rest of my career. But I do have an example of a more recent research study that I did, which did think through caring about care and research relationships, particularly with regard to this action component. This was a research study that examined what makes schools resilient following earthquakes and floods. And it included collaboration with civil society actors who are well-versed in working with schools. And I do think that for this kind of research that I'm advocating for, a collaboration is necessary. So together we developed and mediated collaborative group reflections with teachers that function not only as methods of data collection, but also as opportunities to strengthen school resilience through collective reflection and dialogue. So this was a longer process where we spent many hours together with teachers, engaged in different kinds of activities. We talked about school values. They drew a timeline of what their school was like before the disaster, immediately after, and now. They also co-wrote stories together with a particular focus on what was the most significant change for them after the disaster. And they could also, we had ideas for what we could do, but they led the process. So they would say what kind of engagement they would like. Through these activities, teachers were encouraged to identify both strengths and areas that require further support in schools. And then, and that was very challenging, we presented our preliminary findings to them. So we analyzed all the material and then shared our interpretations with them. Then worked collaboratively with them to develop a tree of resilience and also an accompanying action plan identifying what it is that the school needs in order to strengthen resilience in future disaster contexts. So care here was not just interpersonal, it included strengthening the school as a collective capable of responding to future crises. So in this sense, care involved creating spaces for reflection, collaboration, and collective problem solving. So as you can see, I'm sort of talking about, I would still consider this rather a modest, but I'm talking about more participatory action research. But it's also important to remain realistic about the scale of change that research can produce. I think it's kind of useful maybe to distinguish between more first-order change and then maybe second or third-order change. So, first-order change are these kind of incremental improvements. And when we left the research site, based on the feedback that we received from the teachers, we had contributed through this process, as I said, which was about data collection. It was also about theory, but it was also about giving something back to the community that we were researching. And this was something that was based on the feedback that we got, something that was very much appreciated. Of course, for any second-order transformation, any shifts in institutional paradigms, structures, that would, of course, require so much more, including engaging with power and authority beyond the school itself. So before moving to my final remarks, I want to acknowledge that understanding research as a caring practice raises a number of tensions. Some of these tensions relate to the time and the emotional labor that such practices require. Also, whether such sustained, careful engagement is realistic within academic cultures that are structured by precarious employment, pressures to secure funding, and the demand for rapid publications in high-impact journals. Academia and funding structures reward speed and productivity. This is like, this is the focus, rather than slow, relational forms of engagement. As soon as one project ends, as soon as one paper is published, we move on to another project, we start writing another paper. And also, and this is something I can connect to what you were talking about, research relationships are not always grounded in shared values or mutual political commitments. They can also be antagonistic. So care is also political. What does practicing a sociology as care mean when you're an anti-racist sociologist researching racist groups? Is participatory action research even a possibility in such a case? Because care in such contexts cannot mean reproducing forms of domination and harm towards others. So to return to the question then that's raised in the title of this panel, sociology as public, caring, or detached, I would argue that sociological research in my own subfield often remains insufficiently caring and detached. Participants are rarely treated as collaborators in knowledge production, reciprocity is limited, and the aspiration to make a positive difference is expressed in dispassionate policy recommendations. And for me, this is also where sociology as care intersects with public sociology. I understand care not just as an interpersonal ethic of being considerate to research participants, and I understand public sociology not simply in a traditional way as a kind of one-way communication of sociological knowledge to wider publics. What care and organic public sociology have in common is a commitment to engagement with and for the communities whose lives we study. And of course, many sociologists undertake very important works of very important work, both publicly, also in terms of political engagement, speaking about inequalities connected to their research, contributing to public debate, or participating in broader struggles for social justice, either through formal politics or informal struggles. And their publics, as Baraboy has noted, include human rights organizations, labor movements, trade unions. And he also mentions students as a sociology's public. So the argument that I'm trying to make here is that another public is our research participants. So it's about recognizing them as a public and approaching the research relationship through practices of care, making it more directly relevant to individuals and their communities. And in a post-flood community where I carried out research several years ago, one of the research participants who was referring to community cleavage that has resulted from post-disaster kind of state recovery processes said something that I think you will all be happy to hear. And it's one of these kind of gems one collects en route. So, we were talking about the difficulty of recovery for this community, and this person said, we need a sociologist just like we have a municipal officer, like komunalni redar. So, to the best of my knowledge, there's no blueprint for what a sociology of care would look like. But I want to put out something that is a bit maybe contentious and would require us to, kind of also extra admin work. So I'm going to throw it out very carefully. A tool maybe for making us think through sociology as care could be through our ethical review procedure. So imagine if an ethics review doesn't end before you actually start doing the research, but rather it ends when you have completed your whole project. And the review includes how you contributed or failed to contribute to the participants and their communities. And maybe this then would encourage us to think differently about our responsibilities as sociologists, not simply in terms of avoiding harm, but also how we engage with our research participants and what our research leaves behind. So, in an uncaring world, practicing sociology as care is maybe a small attempt to practice a different way of being with others, a way that's not uncaring, and in particular, a way that's not extractivist.
Thank you so much, Karin, for opening these very important questions. And we have Sinisha. He also promised to be concise, so we'll see.
How long was I?
So,
Done that. Great presentation. It was really.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Oops, sorry. So, hello, and thank you for this opportunity to speak in this really exciting panel. I would use first this opportunity to congratulation to Sasha. Sasha knows how I deeply appreciate his work and his contribution to sociology. But I'm also mentioning this, as Sasha said, our personal story. And my contribution will be also personal story or personal reflection of my work without much theoretical ambition, I'm sorry to say. So if I would give a title to my lecture, the title would be, "But whose side are you on?" And I'm inspired to this title by the seminal work of Eileen Barker. Eileen Barker, Professor Emeritus of London School of Economics, who devoted her life to studying of small religious communities in post-communist Europe, but also around the world. So she had a paper, very influential and highly quoted paper, "But who's going to win?" And this title, "But who's going to win?" started from her lecture in Warsaw in late 80s. So she was invited to Warsaw in late 80s to talk about religion in the West, in the Western Europe and USA. So she delivered a lecture emphasizing the freedom of religion, the benefits of freedom, the benefits of liberal society. And then she got a question from the audience. This idea of liberal society is very interesting, but who's going to win? She didn't understand the question. She thought there was some problem in interpretation. But then a few days later, she came to Krakow. And she gave the same speech in the Krakow, and she got the same question. But who's going to win? So I use this anecdote by Eileen Barker, not only as a story about post-communist understanding of religious pluralism, but also as a wider metaphor for the position of sociology itself. I would say that in divided societies, sociologists are often not asked whether their analysis is valid, empirically grounded, theoretically informed, but rather, whose side are you on? Consequently, the question, who's going to win, is not only a question asked about a religious group, it's also a question asked about sociology, knowledge itself. Is sociology defending religion, criticizing religion, defending liberalism, attacking tradition, supporting minorities, undermining national identities, and so on and so on? So to put these more in the context, as I said, such a question, but who's going to win, was a kind of guidelines for Eileen Barker's work on small religious communities in post-communist Europe. She analyzes, I would say, the complex, shifting dynamic of competition, and the outcome is not who won, but actually the outcome is a long-term sociological navigation, including several points which I found very important. The first one is state favoritism. Which group secure legal registration, state funding, or property restitution? Second is public perception. Which group are labeled, explicitly or implicitly, as dangerous sects, and how they navigate to avoid such labeling. And finally, sociological perception. Which groups we do care for? Which groups we do consider worthy of sociological attention, protection, critical understanding? And how? I'm using recent examples from the newspapers in Croatia, which recently, I would say, attacked two small religious communities, saying that allegedly they treated members as fully possessed by these and imposing quite strong surveillance of the members. So, in this case, how can sociology defend individual freedom without ignoring the collective freedom of religious communities? And how we can critically analyze religious communities without being immediately accused either of hostility to religion or sympathy for sex? Just to add, though in very private circles, I got very explicit accusation. Look at what they are doing. How can you share sympathy for such a small religious group? Going a little bit back in development of sociology, my PhD thesis was about the development of sociology of religion from 1995 to 1990, so during the communist time. And I analyzed the development of sociology of religion, and my argument in that analysis in my PhD work was that sociology of religion was faced by two challenges. First is to find a compromise between sociological, theoretical, and empirical work with both political ideology and prevailing Marxist domination in social sciences, although there were different strands of Marxism, of course, but also how to deserve a credibility to different publics, various sciences, including theology, politician, journalist, and general public. So one promising strategy which I found in the work of the founders of sociology of religions in Croatia was to do the valid empirical research and to stick to the empirical findings. I would say a kind of detached sociology. It was not detachment as indifference. It was detachment as a strategy of intellectual survival and scientific credibility. The other strategy was a little bit more risky, but also very promising in the long run, to slowly develop different theoretical standpoints and use middle-range theories. The result, in general, if I would say, we had a credible sociology of religion, though suspicious about whose side the sociology was on. And this suspicion was never overcome fully. Going to the post-communist circumstances, my argument is that in post-communist Croatia, unlike in some other post-communist societies, we did not experience even a short, clearly liberal moment in which religious communities gained full freedom, sociology of religion was welcomed as a legitimate scientific field, and sociology more general could easily re-legitimize itself. So that was a little bit different story because of the collapse of Yugoslavia, war, and all what happened, then happened in Hungary, Poland, and some country. I'm talking about the very early of the 90s. So let me now turn to other fields of my interest: gender, social welfare, marginalized group people, migration, particularly in connection with my experience of teaching sociology. So just two observations and two very small stories. In 2005, Paul Stubbs and I published a paper on clientelism and social policy in Croatia. One of my colleagues read the paper and he told me, I quoted him, "The paper is very good, but don't you feel ashamed to write such a negative image about Croatia in English language and a journal with so wide impact?" When I started to teach sociology at the law school 10 or 15 years ago, when I was teaching about the concept of gender, gender equality, or LGBTQI groups or migrants, I could see in eyes of some of students, they do not agree with me, or they are not comfortable with what I'm talking about. However, they were silent. Only occasionally, when I pushed them, they shared their opinions. However, in the last few years, complete shift happened. They are no longer silent. They are confident, they can share their opinion, usually very distant, very conservative. So I would say the new openness is not simply democratic deliberation, as it comes with logical vocabularies, even very open hostility. Recently, one of my students stood up and she said, "Migrants, of course they are rapists. They rape. We should get rid of them." So the group discussion became much more vivid, which is wonderful on the one hand. But at the same time, I feel that some of my students do not longer listen to me. I have difficulties to explain the concept of gender, that the gender is not the gender ideology. And to explain that the poor people who can't afford to come to the university, as a good portion of my students think that if individual works hard, he or she can achieve anything. There are no structural barriers, they are just those who are lazy or not lazy. So in one class, we have students who belong to very completely opposite camps. We can say that the classroom has become one of the key sites of public sociology, talking about the public sociology. So before sociology entered the media, policy debates, public lectures, it already faces the public in the classroom, through students who bring with them the moral divisions, media narratives, and ideological conflicts of wider society. When I think back how I teach, I think I use detached strategy while talking about individuals and groups who do care. I want to show that we have categories and that we have interesting and useful empirical data. And I'm not sure if I'm successful. I really want to know if other teachers feel the same pressure, the pressure to demonstrate the usefulness of sociological knowledge in a deeply divided society, when any talk about social problem is immediately put in ideological boxes. Are my concerns an isolated case or shared by others of you as well? Of course, we know what happened in our society in the meantime. We research about religious conservative groups and their impact in society. We know that religion has become very much politicized in the public. Still, I think there are two issues. Talking about religion, I can observe, and we can observe if we really go deeply, that religiosity becomes much more fluid and much more fragmented than it was 20 or 30 years ago. I would say it became plural in two senses. The first one is that ways of being a democratic religion has become much more diverse. What we used to call the politicized religion in the 90s is completely different what we term politicized religion today. So there are two different sides and there are two different ways of being politicizing and going with religion in politics and in all a social issue. Another is really interesting theologically. Theologically, talking at least about the Catholic theology, it has also become a plural. Not because theology, official theology taught at the university is becoming plural, but because the lay people took, their liberty or their opportunity. They're mainly using the social media to talk about the theology, to interpret religiousness and to interpret theology from their own point of view. And that is something that is very much, concerned and looking as a suspicious from formal theologian who study and who teach sociology at the faculties. So I would say there are many changes which we usually easily overlook. I know that time is precious, so I would just say whose side I am on. I know whose side I am, and I believe I have demonstrated this from my sociological work. However, today I'm much less certain about how to make this visible and convincing to different publics. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sinisha. Very overlapping and complementary talks we heard, and there are some hands in the air. So we are opening discussion. We have around half an hour to conclude. Yeah, so we will extend a bit. Tanya, then Sasha. No censorship. Feel free to talk whatever you want. So it's public sociology within the panel.
Hi, my name is Tanya. I'm going to try to be short and address all three of you in one big thing. Can you hear me?
Stood up a little bit, stood up and then...
So, thank you to all three of you. It is really very inspiring to hear, and I have many thoughts. I will try to talk briefly about them. So first, I want to address the request for a dialogue. And I just want to say, as somebody who studies anti-demobilization, I think this is a request that is asking for dialogue with bad faith actors. And it actually works only to legitimize their evidence, which is evidence of pseudoscience and false claims. And which I expect, Sisha, that you are hearing in your class as well, because they're very good at making the talking points disseminated in general public. And so we don't need to dialogue with them. We need to make our talking points accessible to students So they have that in class when they're talking about migrants or LGBT groups or something else. So this is the public part that we need to do, not in terms of dialogue, but in terms of public active role and visibility of actual evidence. So, and I want to talk to you, Karen, about your request for the ethics commission. Again. So I am teaching ethics for the first time this year. And I'm starting my class with saying, I'm trying to teach you ethical responsibility, so that you feel guilty, because nobody else will sanction you. So in that terms, I can see the way you are going with this responsibility that doesn't stop with the procedure. However, one thing that I also talk to them is how nobody is there to help them or support them when they need it. In terms of not only ethical advice, but also what if you are in danger in the field? What if you have emotional problems with what you're doing, which is also very emotional, especially participation work? What if you have legal requests? There is no such thing as confidentiality in sociology in terms of being a legally protected claim. So we cannot ask for anything like this until we provide also institutional protection.
Okay, great. I propose that we collect another question. So, Sasha, please.
Thank you. I have a question for Tari. Before we all become care bears, I just have to share this frustration. I was always confused to be social worker, and I said I'm a sociologist, and I don't want to be a social worker. I don't want to care too much. I do care, and I realize when I do my research with migrants, is that their betterment, what you advocate, sometimes on the local level, usually, and on the macro level, means not so much the betterment for the local population, to be honest. Particularly on the labour market and housing market, the prices go up. So if you fight and care for one group, you do produce maybe worse conditions for the other group. How can you know in advance what would be the role of care there in sociology and really push for the interests of one group that is the focus of your study? What about the others who are not the focus of your study but also affected with the outcomes of such engaged research?
Whose side you are on?
Not on mine.
The question is, who is going to win? Okay, so please go.
Okay. I still believe the role of sociology is to explain and to predict. Predictions are possible, Randall Collins proved it. If you really apply strictly sociological models, you can predict outcomes such as fall down of the Soviet Union, which he did in 1980, 10 years before it happened.
Okay, who would like to respond? So you can, of course, blend questions.
I also have a question, but first to the colleagues here at the panel, but also to the public. So thank you so much for this very question of giving platform to, let's say, hate speech and people of totally different views that we consider ourselves wrong views. But there is a danger in that. I live long enough. As a child, I experienced communism. And some sociologists, including Zygmunt Bauman, they really believed in their vision of better society, right? And they were doing a lot to kind of make it happen. Then, after the fall of communism, we had a group of sociologists, also very well known, recognized, who just took the side of the West. And they were labeling people who were not catching up with the transformation, right? They were labeling them Homo Sovieticus, etc., etc. They were not listening to them. We know better. So this is a very tricky issue, you know, because perhaps we should open the space for those with whom we don't share the same views. Let me give you an example of migration. In Poland, after the war of 2022, despite of our very ruffled and very bloody history, because we had massacres, genocide between Ukrainian and Polish population, so it was in 2000, even in 1943, during the war, 100,000 Poles were slaughtered by Ukrainians, and 30,000 Ukrainians were slaughtered in return. So it was a very, very bad experience. Nonetheless, when Russia attacked Ukraine, Polish citizens just rushed to the border to receive migrants in their houses. So they were living with people they never seen in their entire life. They were opening their houses. So imagine that your family comes and stays for 1 week and the other, right? And this is a challenge. And imagine living with people you don't know, with different backgrounds at your place for weeks or even months. So people, were helping at once, because we have a common enemy, Russia. We know how it works. So the past was forgotten. But now, after a couple of years, we have to recognize fears of people. There is a group of people who were never recognized, those whose families died during the war by Ukrainians, and for many, many years this issue was not addressed. Because we had a communism, Ukraine was a part of Soviet Union, those issues couldn't be discussed publicly. After the fall of communism, it was never discussed, because our idea was that we need free Ukraine. It was also a postulate of solidarity movement. Free Ukraine, free Belarus, etc., etc. So it was our attitude. However, those people were never recognized, never heard. They were always silenced. This is not the right moment. We have another issue. In big cities, quite a number of people are Ukrainians, over 20%. Of course, it has its consequences for public health, because the lines are longer and longer. Also for housing. We even had students' protests, because the housing was unfortunately so expensive that students couldn't afford that. And my question is, we should open space to listen to those concerns. I am not saying that we should, open space for anti-migrant voices, nothing like that. But we have to talk with people who have their own views based on their everyday experience. So even if it's against our vision that we should live in a plural world, and we have to recognize the fears of others, of those with whom we do not agree. So.
Okay. I think maybe we misunderstood each other, because I think we're talking about two different audiences. Like, one is the audience, like people who have their fears, and of course we need to speak to them. We are speaking to them their science. That's what we're doing. We're trying to make a point across clearly and to address their fears from a different point of view. But the dialogue with people who are eroding democracy deliberately and willingly, misusing science, this is not possible.
True, but on the other hand, and this is a question connected with the very idea of care and well-being, slightly changing the topic. We have our students, and we are taking care of them, that they feel well in our classroom, we respect them, etc., etc. But at the same time, we are protecting them to this level that they cannot face any obstacles, different views, etc., because they feel personally attacked. And this also happened. This also happened on both sides, of those who represent, let's say, perhaps not right-wing, but conservatives' views, Sometimes they complain that they cannot voice openly what they think, because they are criticized severely by students and also by university professors, right? And the other side is also being attacked, that they are leftists, that they are even more fiercely, and especially from far right governments, etc., etc. But this vision of Sari Hanafi of dialogical sociology, I think it has some rationale, because otherwise what we see is radicalization. We label each other and we don't talk to each other. So this is something that I am really afraid of. That this is a growing polarization. We have different camps, and we avoid certain topics, not to hurt someone. And this is this point of European Commission, that a university is a platform when students learn how to become citizens, how to discuss, how to, for me it is more, we talked about it with Krešimir, the vision of Habermas, of communicative action, right, and the public sphere, when everyone is respected and can voice their claims to truth, to values, and this is important. I don't want to be misunderstood. I am totally against legitimizing radical views, but I am for dialogue, for productive critiques, for looking for solutions. Okay, having said that,
Yes, please.
Karin.
We have a Care Bear question. Yes, here. Please.
Okay, so Tanya, thank you for this question. One concern I do have with my discourse here is that it can sort of have a moralizing tone and a guilt-tripping tone, and you're right to point that out. However, I think, fundamentally, it is about thinking in the times that we live in now, but I don't think it's specific to the times that we're living now, is how we do sociology and the shifts that requires. And so, of course, these shifts will also include new institutional moments that will come out of that kind of a disposition and that kind of a commitment. So, once long ago, we could decide whether or not to apply for a project. Now we have project offices that support us in writing project applications. We have more workshops on how to write academic articles for high-impact journals. And so, I think, this is sort of thinking about these shifts, understanding, of course, that these shifts require institutional support and can't be reduced to individual responsibility. Sasha, this use of Care Bears, I had a Care Bear as a child, and I don't like this use of Care Bears in this, my favorite fluffy toy. So, okay, first a disclaimer that this is, as we're reflecting on some of our careers, I've had a turning point in my career where I have just felt that I can no longer go on doing research that has no impact. And I understand, Eric Olin Wright has these sort of, in a very different context, talking about change. And so, on the one hand, one can think of oneself as a sociologist being an advocate for change at systemic level. So, invoking revolutions, invoking radical rupture, and connecting to social movements who are invoking that. On a different level, one can be committed to policy improvements within the system, but they're still on a more abstract level. And I do think that there have been policy shifts through a combination of research work and collaboration with other actors. And I mentioned that I think collaboration is important. For example, some of us who have been working on inequalities in higher education, I do think our voice was heard to a certain extent in terms of scholarships for poor students. So there is that level. But one thing that I'm, I think is worth exploring is this sort of third level, which is empowerment in these kind of niches, empowerments at a more micro level. And when I mean that, I think, but I think that what you bring as a sociologist with your toolbox, your theoretical toolbox, your methodological toolbox, I think you through a research process, also contribute to knowledge production and understanding different perspectives. And in that sense, when you're talking about this community, and I obviously, there's a problem of being naive about this, but I do think that there is a role in mediating deliberative democratic processes. So, for example, in a research study I will be doing, I have future visioning workshops in the community. And so bringing people in the community from different walks of life, and this might fail, and there are all sorts of power dynamics in that community. We know that when we do focus groups, it's not a good idea to have a head of a school together with teachers or cleaners. So we need to obviously think about the power dynamics. Mm-hmm. But I am sort of, I want to try and bring together, theory and, as I said, qualitative techniques, which I think are very productive for opening up conversations about difficult issues and being, moderators in communities through a deliberative process. And if the outcome is such that there are people who are unhappy with it, maybe participating in such a process, at least you feel that you've been consulted.
Explanation and prediction, and I've explained well the phenomenon. I find it actually model, and then this happens. I feel great.
Well, I think that's great, and I think, yeah. And I think you've made a very important point here, and it links to the beginning of my presentation, which was my own positionality. So when I reread Baraboy's article, one thing that I noticed was how permissive he is. So he's like critical and public and professional, and policy, they all coexist. Bourdieu, who I'm very fond of quoting, was very permissive as a methodologist. He was also, I'm not taking here the moral high ground. I am a bit with this suggestion that ethics reviews come at the end, because that's a specific intervention. So obviously that was to provoke a conversation. But, one thing I love about sociology as a field is that I think it enables us to, have our different habituses, to use an overused term. And this is something that I'm committed to here. And maybe someone here will find that they can respond to that and will feel that there's a community there that they can connect with. That's my ambition.
Excuse.
With survey, the ordinary survey is one thing, but if you come to participant observation, there is completely another thing. Let's spend 2-3 years with a delinquent group, and you will see how you think about care sociology.
Okay, thank you for the comment. It's a good point. The question is whether the same ethics of care applied to different types of research. But let's go back to Sinesha. for hers response, and then we have very short contribution of Mirko, and then we need to conclude this great discussion.
Just two small remarks, because there was no question directly to me, but I want to reflect. First, the dialogue between Kaya and Tanya, I think there are two different things. One is how we approach different groups while doing research and how we include them in our research. And the second, connected but still very much separate, is dialogue and general dialogue in society. I wouldn't confuse that. I learned in my life a lot from Nathan S.C. Clark. Nathan S.C. Clark is a very prominent sociologist of religion who worked on the topic of the family violence and response of religion to family violence. So she started to work with those who were victims of family violence. Then she went to the churches and see how they respond, and then he come to the perpetrators of family violence. So, to include really different types of group without losing, methodological rigor and, theoretical perspective. And another thing, I'm not think I'm a saver of the word, Sasha. However, I think that we should be very careful about what is happening in society, whether we are involved and how we are involved. Just one example. 24 years ago, Croatia passed the law on legal status of religious communities. Davorka was president of Sociological Association, and Davorka, we organized a huge gathering and huge roundtable in Norderski Dom, which was very successful. I was asked by the then Ministry of Justice, Assistant Minister of Justice, to come to provide my expertise. And I think, not because of my involvement, but because it was deliberate public discussion, we got fairly, I've said, good law. I just by chance heard yesterday that Ministry of Justice is preparing the new law completely secretly, without any public discussion, which would, as what I heard, undermined religious rights of religious communities in a great extent. So this is a kind of, moment, and what we can see as a sociologist, how we are not able to act in the public, but how these type of things show what kind of society we are living in and what the consequences and what the problem we will soon have in the future.
Okay, Mirko, please 1 minute, and then 1 minute respond, and then that's it. Okay.
Interrupted something, I didn't mean to. There was 2 minutes before 6:30, so I thought we were finished, and I just had a suggestion to make, because I think, like Karin said, that these issues are worth exploring. I think it would be very good if sociological review, Croatian sociological review, published the new work that you have already produced, which you read from here, and invited contributions from other people who are interested, so that we could get a thematic issue with some light thrown on this subject. I would be very interested in writing. I think your idea is wonderful, that Humboldtian science should be reintroduced, so to speak, and especially we need it at European level beyond national containers, but I'm deeply sad to see that the European Commission is doing everything against them. They have been doing this for 20 years now, which is a long time. So these contradictions would be very interesting to explore. I know we have to pay lip service to the European Commission because we want to get funding and be very careful and caring and whatnot, but I think these issues are worth explaining and exploring, so I invite people, and Anita is not here, the editor, but I think she would not have anything against that.
Thank you very much. It's a great point, and in the same line, I would propose that we reflect upon that maybe this topic will be the theme of the upcoming Congress. Why not? Anyhow, we are in a quest for the topic of the Congress 27, so we should consider this because there is obviously a quite urgent need to discuss on this. Okay, Karim?
Yeah. I just wanted to say just one more thing to Sasha. And it's something that I also wanted to raise when I was talking, but I didn't. I think that most of our research that we propose, we mention somewhere reciprocity, right? So you have to write somewhere, what are the benefits of this research? And I don't think we deliver on that. I don't think we deliver on reciprocity. It's something that's like something that is after the project ends. Maybe a policy will be introduced, maybe it won't. But another thing that I wanted to mention, and this is maybe a bit kind of off the grid, but the Cambridge Dictionary of the Year word of the year last year was parasocial. And it's about people having relationships with influencers. So they're these one-way relationships that people are building with people they will never talk to. And they feel a connection with these people. And I think actually this kind of work is fighting for our, for the social. It's actually, you know, going back beyond parasocial into the real world and actually engaging with people and having conversations with them rather than just publishing papers.
Okay, excellent. I think that we learned quite a lot in terms of vocabulary from post-disaster, parasocial, academic freedom, of course, and so on. So what to say, many questions are opened. We tackle some of them, but the discussion will continue, and we will continue our work at 7 p.m. When assembly will take place. So we have around 15 minutes break, but before to close the session, thank you very much to our speakers, to our discussants, and everybody for the amazing session. Thank you.